Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's KETIV Autodesk Virtual Academy session. Like always, I'm Nigel Mbayak, haven't changed since last week. I'm also here joined with Jorge Fernandez, who's giving a presentation today, as well as the newest member of the KETIV team, Mike Razzo. He's one of our account executives here. So welcome, Mike. So today we'll be going over some bill of materials configuration in Inventor, and then we're also going to be covering a little bit of stuff in Vault. That's been one of the most requested sessions from you guys based on the after session surveys that we do give out. So make sure that you fill those out if you want one of our next sessions to be something you want to see. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and pass the microphone over to Jorge.
All right, thanks, Nigel. So yeah, everybody will be discussing bill of materials configuration in Inventor, a little bit about Vault as well. And really the goal for today is to be able to make sure that you know how to leverage your bill of materials in Inventor. And then in Inventor, we call it bill of materials in the assembly, but we also call it the parts list in the drawing. So in the drawing, we're going to go over some of the parts list options you have, how the bill of materials affects it, and how you can go back and forth. And then at the very end, I'll briefly explain for those of you that are on this session that own Vault, Vault Pro especially, how that affects Vault Professional BOMs. There'll be a completely separate session on that specifically, but I just wanted to touch a little bit on that and let you know how it's going to affect you as well. So the first thing I want to talk about before we jump into the live demonstration part of it is that there are manual methods, of course, and then there's an associative method to make your bill of materials. Now, the manual method, I know a lot of you on this call are probably doing that today, whether because it's just a necessity, it's a standard you've done in the past, or maybe you're working with an ERP program and you're exporting from there. There could be a few different things, but keep in mind that is not associative to the Inventor file, right? Where if you go through Inventor, you can create your bill of materials inside of there, your parts list, and it's completely associative to the component so that if something in the component changes, you trade it out or something like that, you'll get updated information. If you use the, just an Excel sheet, for example, and you need to continue doing that, by all means, go ahead, that's fine. But maybe you can use the bill of materials in Inventor to compare it at least. Do a little double check or something like that. I think that sometimes we forget that it's not just there to give us a report and be able to put a nice list on our drawing, but also to be able to double check when we do have to do manual BOMs, definitely. So a little bit about what we're going to see today. We're going to see how inside of an assembly we'll have a bill of material, and there's a structured method and a parts only method, where in structured you can actually see the sub-assemblies and all the indented pieces from it. And in a parts only mode, you'll see a flat list where you won't see sub-assemblies. Some components you'll see a little bit different depending on what you chose for the type of BOM condition it's going to take or category. So that's mostly what we're going to talk about today, are the different BOM structure types you can pick from. We'll look at virtual components and being able to bring in things like grease, glue, paint, things of that nature. Also, we'll look at parts list in the drawing. So a bill of materials on a drawing is called a parts list. How we can change this representation, choose only things that are balloon, for example. We'll see some of the other filters. And then finally, exporting the bill of materials where we can find those options. Just one other thing before we jump right into it, I wanted to explain the different structure types we're going to look at. So what you'll notice is as we go to different methods of being able to see the different structures we can pick from, there's going to be a pick down list that we'll see. Normal, inseparable, purchase, phantom, and reference. So the normal one is the one we're always going to see. That's the default one. It's the one we're most commonly used to, and sometimes we haven't even explored them because we didn't really think a little further about, how do we want to leverage our bill of materials a little bit more. So the normal one is the one we're usually comfortable with. It includes the quantity calculation. It'll mean also that the components will be added up when it comes to getting the sum of the mass. But there's also other components that like purchase, for example. So for purchase, think of things like nuts, screws, hinges. Let's look at that component on the bottom right-hand corner, for example. We're looking at a cylinder, right? If you're not the cylinder manufacturer, you're probably buying that, downloading it, or you might be creating it, but it's a purchase component. So you don't need to see all the different components that it's made up of. Instead, you'd like to see just one line item in a parts only view of this component, right? The next one is reference. Now reference, think of this in a few different ways. One is you see the iMic on the right hand side there. That comes from cbliss.com, by the way. For those of you who haven't seen that before, sometimes you need something as a point of reference to kind of be able to see a little bit better what the size is. Or maybe you're going to be installing onto something else that's already existing, some as-built or something like that. Basically, these components, you want them to be ignored from the bill of materials, and you don't want them to be included in the mass calculation. So you have these as reference or points that you can still see it in the model, but you don't want them to be effective in your bill of materials in any way. As a matter of fact, it will show as hidden lines, and all the child components underneath it will be ignored. The next one is phantom. And what phantom is, the way to think about this one is think about this example we're seeing on the right-hand side of the screen, the bolt and the nut. You might buy it as a set, and this is one example. There's a lot of different ways to look at it, right? But when it comes down to it, it's being able to manage a set of things. It might just be simple as two components, but you don't want to see the assembly itself as a line item. You're just using this assembly to manage it, to bring it into your assembly quickly. But you actually wanted to count up how many bolts and how many nuts. That's what you want to use the phantom for. Also, the phantom, it will include it in the calculation, so it's not like it ignores it. Again, it's just that it doesn't read the assembly line item for it. So all the children will actually show up in your bill of materials if you use phantom. Inseparable. Think of this as something that's usually welded, glued, or bonded, even something as a dowel pin pressed into a part. These are components, or assemblies I should say, I'm sorry, that in order to make a change to it, you're probably going to have to do some physical damage. Or you're going to have to take the entire assembly, like let's say this one we have up on the screen, for example, and if you needed to make a cut on it, you have to find some way to, either someone's got to hold it down or clamp it down, make some kind of fixture to make the holes into it, right? So we're making a change to the assembly itself, not the part, right? And so if there was going to be a change, we wouldn't rev up just one of the components, like let's say the panel on the left-hand side. We'd technically do the whole assembly, really. So these are things that we want that would be considered inseparable. They're basically an assembly that would be together, and you want it to show up as one line item only. And then you can open up the welded assembly and take a look at it in there and see its breakdown separately. All right. Now that I've told you a little bit about the background of what those different things are, let's go ahead and jump right into it.
And just to remind you all, if you do have any questions during this, feel free to type them in to the GoToWebinar panel, and we'll make sure to cover those all by the end of the presentation.
All right. So again, bill of materials is really important because if you're, whether you're doing it manually or if you're, using Inventor, you want to make sure everything's accurate, right? So these bill of materials are going to help us do that. Let me show you the different locations from which you can make these changes. First of all, if I go to this, I'm working on this assembly. I'm sorry, let me explain a little bit about what we're looking at. We're looking at a piece of an assembly that goes into a yogurt filling machine. And we have these different components. Some are standard, some we're fabbing, for example. But we're going to use this stepper motor over here on the right-hand side to take a look at how we can manage this. I'm going to open it up in its own window. And inside of here, one of the ways we can do this is if we go ahead and go to our tools and document settings. In here, you'll find some other information like changing the units, how you want the sketch snapping to work, for example. But at the far right, you'll see bill of materials. And in here, you can choose the BOM structure. So when would you use this? You would use this if you knew up front when you're creating the component already what you want it to be. You don't have to do it this way. It's an option for you. So you get to choose when to use this method of applying which type of bill of material structure it's going to take on. Now back at the assembly level, how do we do it from here? I think this is really where you can leverage it much more. It's a lot easier to see everything in the context of the assembly. You'll see it under the Manage panel in your Assemble tab, Bill of Materials. By the way, it'll also be in your Manage tab as well. there'll be a manage panel in the manage tab. So when we open the bill of materials, let me explain the user interface just a little bit more before we go into making the modification. First of all, up here at the top right hand corner, this is where you can export it out. So this simply takes everything that's exactly in your assembly. You know, it doesn't matter at this point what type of BOM structure it is. This simply is more like a report of all the components that make up this assembly. And so what we can do is we can export this out, and we can export it out to Excel, to CSV, to Microsoft Access as well. And they give you the opportunity to choose structured or parts only, which we'll go into in just a little bit more. But this is where we'd actually do the export. If you go over to the right-hand side, I'm not sure how many of you on the call already know about the engineer's notebook. So inside of Inventor, you have the ability to create a notebook. And so that's where you can write in comments, you know, things that help understand why you came up with this design, or notes to yourself. So what it'll do is it'll copy this list into that engineer's notebook if you're using that feature. As of right now, we're looking at the model data. So that's why some of these things are grayed out, because this is just simply, again, reading exactly what it sees in the assembly. If we go to structured, we start to see some of these other things come up. So a reminder, structured, what that is, it's going to show me everything in this assembly, but it's going to show me the sub-assemblies and the children underneath that. One quick thing right there, though. You notice there is a sub-assembly here, but we don't see the children underneath. It's a very common thing we get actually in our support cases. How do we turn on the children? By default, it's off. So in order to turn that on, you want to right-click on the tab. You want to go View Properties and change this level to All Levels. At that point, you can choose what you want the delimiter to be. So if you want a colon, a period, for example, you can do that here. Once I select OK, now I will have a plus sign. Okay, so really quickly, one more time, we do get that question quite a bit. If you right-click and go to View Properties, this is where you can choose All Levels. All right, now that we have that, how about the order of these parts? A lot of the times people will also ask, you know, why is this part number 5? That's not what I want. Well, the way it created these numbers is in the order that you bring them into the assembly. So if you wanted to change this and you said, you know what, I decided that I want to move number 4 up, you certainly can do that and just move it up yourself. The thing is, now it's kind of out of order. So now you have the opportunity to say, I want to renumber these items all the way so that it starts at 1 again and I don't have these all out of order. I can also choose to sort these items differently. Maybe I want to go by part number, maybe by description, maybe I want to go by BOM structure. So you have the ability here to be able to say how you want to sort these columns and be able to renumber them again. And these numbers will correlate later to the parts list, which I'll show in a little bit too. Also, talking about the columns and sorting by them, how do we bring up different ones? If you go to choose columns, here you'll see all the different properties basically that we can bring in, including custom properties as well. Let's say, for example, we wanted to bring in material. I would click material and just drag it in over here to the left. Now material is a part of this. I can close this. Maybe I don't want rev. I can click on that and drag it back into the customization dialog here, and it removes it from the list. So again, you just click and drag these to bring them in and out. I mentioned how you can have custom eye properties as well. If the part has the eye property, you will see it in here. But what's even better is I can go in here and say, well, I need to add the OEM number, for example. So it'll actually allow me to say, I'm going to put in this eye property as text and be able to populate this for every single part without having to go back to the part to insert that number. Just to pause there for a second, imagine how much time that would take you, right? If you were to go in there manually to all the parts and add this eye property, now you can just do it to all of them in one shot. All right, this section right here is grayed out, and that's because this is for eye assemblies. For those of you who don't know what eye assemblies are, they're basically the ability to make a table-driven assembly where you can pick which one you want to use, and then it brings up a different configuration of it. So this is where you would be able to choose which configuration you want to look at. To the right, this one is another very important one. If your attention is not on the screen right now, you might want to pay attention to this little thing. Part number row merge settings. What this is if a part has the same part number as another one, it's going to merge them into two and add the quantity for you. That could be a good thing. You might want that to happen. But there are cases where that happens because simply the part name that you gave, maybe it was just sent to fab, I will just say. Well, if you name two parts that, and they are two completely different parts, they're going to merge now, and it's going to think there's two of them. So you want to be careful with this. It's a great feature to have, but you want to make sure you use it when needed. By default, it is on. So it will merge part numbers if it sees it in here. The last one here is update mass properties. And what this is going to do for you is, if you remember, there's different structures, right? There's phantom, there's reference. So if you don't want it to be part of the mass properties and you change it in here, then this is where you can do the update so that it doesn't include it and you get the correct mass properties for your assembly in your drawing. And oh, I forgot to mention down here at the bottom, import and export. This is a common thing that people bring up. They think, oh, I can bring in an Excel sheet then and merge these two. That's not what this import and export is about. This is the configuration we're seeing here, the part number, the BOM structure, then the material, and then the description. So this is all kind of like a configuration that can be saved as an XML, and you can use this import and export to handle that. All right. Now that we've discussed that, we've gotten the user interface and some of the options you have out of the way, let's talk about how we actually make the changes. So if we come over here to the component that we want to change, if I double click on it, I can go ahead and choose which one I want. Notice, by the way, some of these other things are grayed out. That's because I'm using Vault, by the way, so some of these components are released and checked in. I can do this one because this file is checked out to me right now. So if you're using Vault, that is a piece of this, is if you're going to make a change to the part, you do need to have it checked out. And that's whether it's Vault Basic, Workgroup, or Professional, by the way. So if I want to make this, for example, purchased, you notice I'm doing that in the Structured tab. I can do that from the Model Data tab too if I wanted to. You'll see that if I come down here to the bottom, again, I can double click on it and choose it from here. So we're looking at this, it's an assembly. If I go to Parts Only now, you notice that it's coming up as if it were a part, because as we mentioned, what purchase does is it makes it a single line item in parts only. So we're not going to see its components. We just know that this part needs to be, this assembly needs to be purchased, because that's the way it goes, and we know what we're going to get from that. If I come back here and change this, let's say I make it reference. What happens, first of all, it doesn't show up in my parts only. I don't want it to. If it's a reference, I don't want it to affect my bill of materials. I just need to see it on my actual 3D model. What about the 2D part of it, though? Let's close this and take a look at the 2D. So it's going through the drawing, it's updating it right now, and now what happened is that one part changed to this hidden line mode. If I zoom in just a little bit more here, you'll notice it's actually chopping some of this off. Again, this is something we've seen in the support cases, and why I wanted to bring it up is if you're getting this to happen, what's going on is if I double click on the view and go to my model state tab, it's a reference part. It's telling that reference part to have that specific line style, which is hidden lines. And then there's a margin here outside of this box, this green line we're seeing, of how much is going to extend. So if I wanted to see that full part in this view, I would actually want to change the margin of that. Hit OK. It'll update it right now and actually show me the entire part. Oh, I'm sorry, actually I need to go a little further. But now we can see that change happening here, and we can actually make that happen so that we can see that complete part in this view. Just a couple of things to notice here, because we're using this reference part. One of the things I like to point out is it is, we're looking through it, right? It's all hidden lines. Even in this 3D view, now we can see through it. Now, you don't want to use a reference structure type to be able to make this invisible. You'd want to actually right-click on a component and be able to, you can change it in the drawing like that. but this is just a nice little bonus of what you get when you use reference. Okay. If we go back to the assembly here, again, we can always manage it through here and be able to change it if we wanted to. I'm going to change it to back to purchase now, actually. Go to model data and change this to purchase to show you another nice capability inside of the drawing mode. So we'll let the drawing update here. You'll notice that it'll change from that hidden line mode back to the solid. And when we're talking inside of a drawing about bringing in a parts list, then we can come over here and say, okay, let's bring in a parts list. It's going to ask us, do we want structured where we're going to be able to see the sub-assemblies, or do we want parts only? I'm going to choose parts only right now. I'm going to let it do the numeric numbering scheme and just go start with number 1. You can also enable automatic wrapping so that after it sees 10 line items, it'll wrap itself and move to the right. And you can actually split those up between pages now, by the way. That was one of the new features in the last couple of releases. I'll select the view I want to do. You can also browse right here for the file if you wanted to, by the way. You don't have to pick the view from the drawing necessarily. Once I click OK, it's going to bring in the entire bill of materials, or what we call in a drawing a parts list. But we can double click on it and do some more here. There's a few things that are a little bit similar, like the column chooser. You can always choose to bring in more columns or even add new property. By the way, for those of you using something like frame generator, you can bring in a property called G_L, all caps, and that'll bring in the length of it. I'll show you later. We have some links that'll help you out with that too. We also have the ability to do group settings here, where we can say group all of these by, let's say, stock number, so that if you have multiple parts, for your fab shop that are going to use the same stock piece, for example, it can help you with that way. You might create different types of parts lists for different drawings and so forth on different sheets, so it'll help you with that. There's also this really nice filter settings. What this is going to help you out is, what if you need to make a parts list or a BOM for only purchased items? So then I can say, oh yeah, purchased items, only items that are purchased. I'll click OK. Now my parts list has changed, and of course, just like I mentioned, we changed this component or this assembly to purchase, and we see that in the parts list. So let's make sure to take a look on my screen here and make sure the parts list updated. Sure enough, it did. And we now see, oops, zoomed in a little too fast. We now see that component updated, part of our purchased part list. Just a little quick reminder too that you can always change the style of this, by the way. If you have multiple styles to choose from, you can go to your format and choose a different style. You can always go to your Manage tab, and under Styles Editor, this is where you can also manage that parts list, see which ones are coming up by default. Usually we have people right click and create a new one based off of this one, where then you can add, for example, a length for your frame generator pieces, that G_L that I mentioned. Okay. One other thing I wanted to bring up in the assembly level is I mentioned at the beginning virtual components. So when you want to include grease, oil, miscellaneous stuff that you usually wouldn't model, you can do that by using this Create button up here. Some of you perhaps have used it in the past to be able to create the part in the context of the assembly. But now what we can do is say, well, now we want to add a container of oil that's going to go with this. And then we choose virtual component. And then we can say it's going to be a purchased component. So see, I'm doing everything here up front, right? I'm able to say it's going to be in the purchasing parts list. I'm able to give it a name, and I'm saying virtual. That way I don't have to create a brand new part. It's kind of like a placeholder, actually. By the way, these can be used from assembly to assembly too. So now if I go to it, I can go to the iProperties of that one specific component, and through this assembly, be able to type in more information about it. Whether there's an actual part number to it, stock number, description, if there's any custom things that I want to add to it as well, I can still come back here and change the BOM structure if I wanted to as well. And maybe I want to add physical properties to this. I can do all that within here as well. And then I can also go to settings. So if I right click and go to component settings, we'll be able to also access from right here what type of BOM structure is taking the component name. And the most important part I think here is you're not going to say by 1 each of oil. You're going to say what you want it to actually be. So in here you can actually go and make a parameter for it. Let me scroll all the way to the bottom. Oil parameter. And then give it an actual unit type. So here you'll have all the different unit types. You know, if it's liters, probably not for this case, right? But quart or something like that. You can add those things within here. So, you know, this is a little bit outside of the bill of materials, but it's going to enhance and help you leverage the bill of materials, right? All right. So we took a look at the parts list. We took a look at, you know, what's going on over in the bill of materials as well. I can now see in the parts list an update that oil is in there, for example. I can come back here, take a look at it. In the parts list too, you can sort through here. You can export from here as well. And you can still read number, by the way. But if you read number, keep in mind that the number in the assembly is going to be different. Therefore, if you do that, this button right here will turn on and allow you to say, go back to my assembly and make the changes to the actual item so that the numbers correlate back to the bill of materials on the assembly. So that's a pretty key part right there. If you do actually use the assembly bill of materials function, you'll want to make sure you save the item overrides. It's only items though. It doesn't work for the description or part number in this case. If you want to modify these and have it linked back to the part, you actually want to do that at the assembly level. All right, just a few more things that I wanted to touch on really quick before we end this demonstration. For those of you using Vault Pro, I just really quickly want to go over this, but there'll be a completely separate session that'll come up. And actually, for those of you that are interested, please let us know on the surveys at the end if you want to know more about how this can affect the bill of materials in Vault. And then by popular demand, we can decide that maybe we could have that session sooner than later. But really quickly, what it is if you're using Vault Professional, there's items that are available through there. An item, think of it as the actual end product. This product has a title to it, a description, you know, vendor information, part number for the vendor, cost, things of that nature. These are all things that make up that item, as well as supporting documentation, like Word documents, spec sheets, images, files that you share with a customer. So all of these things need to be tied back to an item number. So what Vault does is it allows you to say, make an item number out of these parts for me. And once I have that item number, tie all these things to that item number. It grabs whatever you already have associative, and you can attach anything else to that item. So it's much more than just a part in Inventor. It just uses that information from the part to create the item and then the associative information around it. So the one other thing I want you to go away with this if you're using Vault Pro is how are those BOM structure types going to affect that item going into Vault? And I'll put it pretty simple for right now, but again, we can have a different session on this altogether on its own. Basically, if it's normal, if it's a parent, if it's a purchase part and it's a parent and inseparable, it's going to create an actual item for you in Vault Pro. If it's a reference, a phantom, or a normal part that's a child of a purchase, then it's not going to generate. So there might be quite more questions on that. Please put those into the survey, and then we can talk more about that in another session that will be more dedicated for that. So in summary, we talked about the structure types, all the different types that you have, why to use them, how you can leverage them. Creating virtual components, right, is different from just creating a component, because that way you don't have to have an actual physical file that you have to maintain. And then there's a lot of different options with the parts list as well. That's parts list is basically the bill of materials that goes on the drawing. So I do have some recommended next steps and some links as well to share with you. First of all, I'd like to mention that if you're designing frames, if you're working with large assemblies, or you want to know a little bit more about documentation, a little refresher about how can I manipulate my parts list a little bit more, create a different style for it. We actually do have course catalogs around those different workflows. So if you're interested in that, please let us know in the surveys. We can reach out to you or you can always feel free to contact us as well. We do have specific classes that are tailored to these different workflows and scenarios that could be of interest to you. So these are some of the ones I felt that would actually touch on bill of material and parts list as we discussed today. And there's some really nice things online as well. Like if for those of you using Frame Generator or wanting to just get a cut list, for example, I encourage you to go to YouTube, and if you just search for cut list 2-minute tip, you'll see Rob Cohy's video on it, just 2 minutes, shows you how to set up a cut list inside of Inventor. We also have a couple about how to add part list values, like let's say the weight, the mass of the products, and then how to show it on the drawing. So we have 2 separate videos that you can view from our KETIV playlist channel inside of YouTube. And then again, please fill in the survey, and we'll be glad to give you more information on vault BOM management too.
All right, so on to the Q&A. It's a great session, Jorge. Thank you again for doing that for us. We've got a couple of questions in here. We're actually going to try something new today. If you do want to ask a question and you do have a microphone and wish to ask it like live, I'm going to enable that. Go ahead and just hit the raise hands or raise hand button in the panel, and we'll definitely get to you from there. So let's see here. First question is from Jason Mays, and the question is, I don't think virtual comps can be vaulted. Is this correct?
Virtual components can be vaulted. Oh, so let me reiterate to make sure I understood it correctly. So when you create a virtual component, I think the question is, will that component be vaulted? The answer is no. It won't actually create a component inside of Vault. However, if you're using Vault Professional, it will recognize that you have a virtual component, and it will create an item for you if you want to.
And Steven asks, is there a way to show the thumbnails in exported bill of materials?
Ooh, you know what? I haven't tried that. Let me look at that. I'll make sure to answer your question offline.
For sure. And then this one's from Lauren Hansen. When an assembly is in iFactory, can a component be set to a different bill of materials structure type from one factory member to another? For example, can an item be a reference in one member and normal in another member?
Yes. You know what? I'll double check that for you though, and I'll get back to you. I want to say that answer is yes, but I'll double check and let you know.
And a couple of people have asked, they missed like the first little bit of this session, and when will this be available? I've also gotten a couple emails about that. So like we do every week, all of these sessions are recorded, and we do place them on our YouTube channel. You'll probably see it on there today or tomorrow by the latest. And if you do subscribe to the KETIV YouTube channel, you will receive a notification when that is uploaded. That's that. Douglas asks, what is the advantage of inseparable versus a subassembly?
Inseparable versus a subassembly. So an inseparable usually will be a subassembly. I think you mean more of, using it as normal versus inseparable. It comes down to seeing it as one line item in your bill of materials. So if you want to see it as one line item, then you'll want to make it inseparable. If you don't want to see it that way and you do want to see it indented inside of your parts list, then you might not necessarily want to use inseparable actually for it.
For sure. Yeah, that works with like flanges and stuff. When you add two components together and like want to weld that, it'll show up as one as opposed to like sheet A or part A and part B that you weld together.
Right, and that way you know that if it's inseparable, if you need to make changes to it, you need to open up that assembly and make changes to it. It's kind of like an indicator, especially for when other people are opening your drawings.
For sure. We've got a couple more coming in. Vladimir asks, what units of measure are applicable for virtual components?
Any one of them that are in the parameters. So you'll see liters, I believe quart is in there, millimeters, centimeters, micron. So anything that is available in the parameters will be available for virtual components.
And let's see, let me pull this up, scroll down a little bit. Jason asked another question. We're having issues with the size of parts lists on iParts and iAssemblies. Do you have any workflow suggestions for these types of files?
There could be a couple different ways. The first thing that comes to mind is using the wrapping tool so that you can actually just have them side by side. I'm not sure if you're also experiencing the issue where it's too long in this direction and how big your sheet is. The other thing we've seen people do is they'll split them up and put them onto different drawings. I guess every scenario is a little bit different, but those are some of the things that I would try first.
I think that's it for now. If you do think of any more questions from now till when you take the survey, go ahead and add those into the survey. We'll make sure that one of us gets back to you for that. As well as if you do so have some interest in some of our training catalog and want more information about that, go ahead and let us know in that survey as well.
And don't forget to visit our different social media sites where you get more updates about all of this, especially our YouTube KETIV channel, where you'll actually see all these pre-recorded sessions and many more too, not just the ABA sessions.
For sure. Actually, last minute question from Fred. How can I make a weight like metric tons? Is that one of the parameters in there?
I'd have to double check. If it's in there, then yes. If it's not in there, you'd have to, I guess you have to go with what you have there and just make sure you actually specify, put a note of what that measurement is.
For sure. I think that's it. So yeah, make sure you follow us on all of these things. We do have webinars that aren't just AVAs. We have some that are dedicated towards the AEC group of people too. So definitely go ahead and ask us for those links as well if that's also something you do. And we do give updates on, whenever Autodesk comes up with new and exciting things, we do special webinars for those as well. So I think that's it for the presentation that we have today. Thank you, Jorge, for joining us today. And I'll leave you with this. The calculator is only as smart as the person pushing its buttons. In this case, I guess the products are calculators. So learn more by coming to more AVAs. All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.